Why a $15 minimum wage is actually good. I bet you never thought you'd hear me say that. Make sure you stay to the end of this video because I'm going to share with you my personal story of making minimum wage. And this is something that I have never shared with anyone online. So stay tuned. You're really going to enjoy the personal story. But I'm going to explain my rationale to you in 3 simple, fast steps. Step number 1, let's go over a statistics deep dive. And it all starts with everyone's favorite, AOC. And she is holding a sign that says, "I love Milton Keynes." If you don't know that joke, oh boy, you're really missing out. Editor, go ahead and cut to a clip of Miss AOC talking about her favorite economist, Milton Keynes.
It's funny you asked this because I was just reading today about how Milton Keynes, a famous economist back in the day, predicted that by 2030, US GDP would grow 6 to 8 times what it is, which would allow for everyday people to work 15 hours a week.
But what she has been saying lately has been getting a lot of traction. She's actually been comparing the McDonald's in Denmark to the McDonald's in the United States. And there's a lot of different numbers going back and forth on the internet. I just tried to generalize some of the stats that I saw. But basically, what I can find is that in Denmark, they're paying their workers about $20 an hour. In the United States, we'll call it maybe $7.50. And of course, it varies from state to state. These are just general numbers so you understand the concept. Now, the pushback would usually be, well, okay, they have to increase prices. So at the end of the day, it's not going to benefit the workers or the consumers because they have to pay these increased prices for food at the McDonald's. So the pushback to that the AOC types always tell you is, yeah, but listen, they might have to increase the prices slightly, but not enough to where it makes a difference. As an example, if the workers in Denmark are making $20 an hour, the price of a Big Mac, about $5.20. Here in the United States, if they're being paid $7.50 an hour, that Big Mac is about $4. So, since the average worker with 1 hour of work can buy 3.84 Big Macs in Denmark, and the worker in the United States can only buy 1.87 Big Macs with that same hour of work, that must mean that what we have over here in Denmark is good. And what we have here in the United States is bad. And that is literally the extent to Miss AOC's thought process, if you want to call it that. Okay, so we're going to dive into that in just a moment. But before we do, let's go over kind of the 5 groups that are affected with what's going on here at McDonald's and what's going on in the overall economy. We're going to put all these pieces of the puzzle together in step number 3. So we've got the owners of the McDonald's, the franchisees, the workers, the customers, the shareholders, and the investors. Now, these 2 groups you might think are the same, but they're actually a little different. For more statistics that'll shed light on this $15 an hour minimum wage debate, let's go right to the internet. Let's go over some characteristics of people in the United States, workers, that are making minimum wage. And this is according to a report from the BLS, not to be confused with BS of the government, but the BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, right here. So this isn't some libertarian website or Mises.org or something like that. This is straight from the government. And the highlights, which we'll go to, the age of the minimum wage workers we have in the United States. Minimum wage workers tend to be young. In fact, under the age of 25, made up just under half of everyone working for minimum wage. The biggest group in that demographic were teenagers, ages 16 to 19, paid by the hour. About 8% earned the minimum wage or less, compared with about 1% of workers age 25 and older. So this is where your spidey senses should start going off. Let's go back here, rewind slightly. Earned the minimum wage or less. How could you make less than the minimum wage? Are these people that are just working under the table? If so, how does the government know about them? Let's check out this next part I highlighted. The estimates of workers paid at or below the federal minimum wage are based solely on the hourly wage they report, which does not include overtime pay, tips, or commissions. So you see what's happening here. The people who are making under minimum wage, according to this study, are most likely making way over minimum wage because they're a waitress or a waiter at a restaurant or a bar where 90% of their income is, if not more, is coming from tips, and therefore the restaurant can legally pay them whatever it is, $2 or $3 an hour. It's under the legal minimum wage. So what we need to do is strip out those workers to find out who's actually being paid the minimum wage. That's crucial. So let's dive into this further and check out one of the tables they provide and see if we can really understand what's going on. See if we can get to the bottom of this. When we pull up the table, it becomes much more clear. So we look at adults, which is the main group we should be focused on. Because what AOC, Bernie Sanders, and Elizabeth Warren tell us is there are all these adults that have to put a roof over their head, that have to put their kids to school, that have bills to pay, that are sitting there at McDonald's their entire lives working for minimum wage. Okay, I'm not saying that there aren't some people who fall into that category, but the question becomes, how many? So let's focus on adults 25 years and older that are actually making minimum wage. So what percentage of the workforce? So our total workforce, according to the BLS, is right around 82 million. 0.3%, 0.3% of those individuals are adults 25 and older. So the next question becomes, how many workers does that 0.3% actually represent? That would be 110,000 workers in the entire United States in a workforce of 82 million people. And I know a lot of you right now are saying, George, but there's a lot of people that work at a rate between the minimum wage and $15 an hour. Therefore, if they're making $10 an hour, as an example, they're still going to get an increase in pay of $5 an hour, although they aren't accounted for in these numbers. I totally get it. Trust me, I understand that. And we're going to address that further in step number 2 and step number 3. What we're doing right now is using these data as a starting point to understand the overall concept of the video. So the main takeaways are the highest percentage of workers making minimum wage are teenagers between the age of 16 and 19. And about 110,000 adults age 25 and older are also making minimum wage in a workforce of 82 million. So let's emphasize the point that this is a very small group of people. And when you do a cost-benefit analysis, I don't think there's anyone that could argue that the benefits of helping such a small group, and I'm not saying they're not important, but we have to look at the overall effects on society. But when you're dealing with this small of a group, it's tough to argue that a minimum wage is something that's beneficial. So I think the more interesting or important argument is about all the individuals that are affected, not just the minimum wage workers, but all the way up to $15 an hour. How would their lives change? And then how would the circumstances also change for the entities involved? Not just the workers, but the owners, the customers, the shareholders, and the investors. And I keep saying that with a smile and a bit of a laugh, because that's going to take us right back into our topic of discussion and why I think a $15 minimum wage is good for a select few. Step number 2. Now I want to reveal some numbers from an actual business that pays minimum wage. Imagine that. And I think these numbers are going to shock you, but at the very least, it's going to help us put all the pieces of the puzzle together. Editor, let's go right back to the internet. This is an actual profit and loss statement from a McDonald's franchise. We're calling it Franchise McNomics, or I guess it's an estimated financial breakdown for McDonald's franchisees in the United States. My guess is this is pulled from marketing material that McDonald's gives to potential franchisees. So these numbers are most likely pretty accurate. Net sales, the top line, 2.7 million. And I know a lot of you watching this right now that may not have owned your own business are looking at that top line number and say, my goodness gracious, George, that's almost $3 million a year. They can't afford to pay their workers more. Man, if I was making $3 million a year, I'd be in the Bahamas on my yacht, lighting cigars with $100 bills. But as most of you know, that's not the entire story. So we've got food costs, paper costs, which I would consider what we used to call COGS. I don't know if they still call them that. Cost of goods sold. Right around, call it 918,000. So that brings us down to 1.782. And then we have what McDonald's is calling the controllable expenses. The two I'd like to point out that are most significant: crew payroll. That's $540,000 per year. Manager payroll, and this actually surprised me, $108,000. So, man, okay, McDonald's managers aren't doing too bad. And then we go down to their non-controllable expenses, rent and fees. I assume fees would be franchise fees. They've got accounting, insurance, depreciation and amortization, etc. So our bottom line, what the owner is actually putting in their pocket, according to GAAP, which is generally accepted accounting principles, they would be putting in their back pocket $153,000. So far cry from the top line, which is 2.7 million. So my point is, let's assume these crew workers that are in total making $540,000 are being paid $7.50 an hour. We want to bump that to $15. So basically double it. Okay, well, that would increase crew payroll. And keep in mind, we're not talking about payroll taxes either. So this is a lowball estimate. But that would increase crew payroll from $540,000 to $1,080,000. That's going to be a real big problem when you're increasing your expenses by $540,000 at a minimum, but you're only bringing $153,000 to the bottom line. You don't have to be a math expert to realize this franchisee could not afford that. They'd have two choices. Either you go bust or you raise prices. So the next question becomes, how much of a price increase overall would this franchisee need to compensate for the additional expense with payroll? And here we can guess it would be right around 20 to 25%. Because if we say this is 3 million, 20% takes us up to 600, or around 540. So back to the napkin math, we'll just call it 20% increase to overall prices. So the reason I wanted to highlight that profit and loss statement from a McDonald's that most likely has minimum wage employees is to show you that, contrary to what all the AOC types would lead you to believe, if we see an increase in wages, regardless of whether it's someone from minimum wage going to $15 an hour, someone from $10 an hour going to $15 an hour, or someone from $14.99. maybe I'm exaggerating there, but $14 up to $15. The expense or the burden is not going to be on the shoulders of the business owner because their margins aren't high enough. At the end of the day, there just isn't enough profit to pay the higher wages. So even when we look at a utopian state like Denmark, we see that they chose to increase prices instead of decreasing profits. Step number 3, we answer the question why a $15 minimum wage is good. And more importantly, we discover what politicians' true intentions actually are. And I didn't forget, I'm definitely going to reveal my personal story when I was making minimum wage. I think you guys are really going to love it, so stay tuned to the end of the video. But to answer this question, I think it's better if we think about who the $15 minimum wage is good for, because it definitely benefits a few at the expense of others. Now, there are a lot of cross currents involved with this debate that I did not address, such as business owners potentially reducing staff or cutting hours or trying to automate their systems so they don't have to deal with the additional expense or they don't have to raise prices. But for the sake of this video, we'll assume the only variables are what we discussed in step 1 and 2. So now we're going to try to explain things at a level that even AOC can comprehend. Usually we get in the weeds of the repo market, quantitative easing, the Fed's balance sheet. But we're going to put all that aside right now, and we're going to talk directly to AOC and all of her fans. So let's think this through. For the owners involved, they're not really paying a penalty, like we discussed. So it's kind of a wash. Okay, we got it, AOC? I'm sure you're watching this video. For the workers who are making between minimum wage and we'll say $14 an hour, they do get a pay bump. So for them, it would be good. For the customers, it would be bad because they're paying a higher price. And I know all the time these politicians tell you, and these Keynesian economists, no, this is going to be good for everyone because it's going to increase spending. And that's fantastic for society at large and the economy. Because forget goods and services. All we have to do is spend more and we're all going to be rich. But this theory really doesn't hold up under scrutiny because, yes, the workers are being paid more, but it's coming out of the pockets of the customers who are most likely not the millionaires and billionaires that Bernie Sanders always talks about.
Millionaire and billionaire.
Millionaires and billionaires.
Billionaires and millionaires.
Billionaires.
It's just simply the poor and middle class who are eating at the McDonald's restaurant. Now, some of you may be saying to yourself, yeah, George, but it could come out of the franchise fees that individual franchisees are paying the McDonald's corporation. And that may be true, but that's not really going to come at the expense of the McDonald's corporation, because who owns McDonald's? It's actually the shareholders. And the majority of the shareholders of McDonald's are teachers, firefighters, policemen. Editor, let's go ahead and throw up the chart, and we'll see one of the largest shareholders are actually government workers. So what's bad for the McDonald's corporation is bad for the shareholders, which don't really include millionaires and billionaires, but really the working class, everyday, average Joe and Jane. But there's another group that will really benefit from a $15 minimum wage. And I've mentioned them periodically throughout this video, kind of with a little bit of a grin. Those are the investors. And they're not the shareholders we were talking about earlier. They're the investors who have purchased hard assets, such as commodities, gold, silver, Bitcoin, and possibly even real estate, as long as you've got it with 30-year fixed rate debt or a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. Why? Because if we get this $15 minimum wage, the one thing I can guarantee you is it's going to create consumer price inflation. If we get a lot of inflation, it's going to benefit the investors who hold the hard assets. And one of the other entities that benefits is the government. Your drunk, insolvent Uncle Sam. Why? Because he has got tremendous amounts of debt, almost $28 trillion. And he needs inflation even worse than these investors because he is completely insolvent. He needs higher tax revenue. And the easy way to create additional tax revenue is just to create price inflation. Of course, the honest way to do it would be to produce more goods and services to create economic growth. But insolvent Uncle Sam has no time for that. He just wants to take the short, easy path. So create 1970s type inflation and boom, you can reduce that debt load very quickly. Now, the $15 minimum wage might not be directly beneficial to politicians like AOC, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, but the narrative that we need a $15 minimum wage is very important to their political career. To explain what I'm talking about and to highlight the most important part of this video, editor, let's go right back to the internet. Politicians try to create a victim mentality. Why? Because it gets people to vote for them. They make people feel as though the only way they can get ahead in life is if they vote for the right politician and give the government enough power to make their lives better. This is a complete fallacy. It's disingenuous. And to be very, very clear, the only reason politicians are doing this is because it benefits them. They could care less about you, about me, the average Joe, the average Jane. If you believe that politicians have your best interest in mind, you are lying to yourself more than they are lying to you. Let's go ahead and look at a tweet from Bernie Sanders. McDonald's workers in the United States, $9 an hour. McDonald's worker, Denmark, $22 an hour, 6 weeks annual vacation. A union, 1 year of paid family leave, life insurance, and a pension. America must join the rest of the industrialized world and ensure that our working class can live with dignity. But we just went over the math behind how this works, and we can prove quite easily that it's not a matter of the working class living with dignity. It's a matter of a portion, a very small portion of the working class making a little bit more money at the expense of the rest of the working class. Politicians are always going to try to make you believe that if you just vote for them, that your life will be better. This isn't true. The only individual that has control over making your life better is the person you see every day when you look in the mirror. And this brings me to my personal story about when I was making minimum wage. And where was I working? None other than McDonald's. Of course. Editor, let's cut to the picture right here. This is me working at McDonald's. That's right. And you can see I'm not 16 years old. In fact, this is around 2017, 5 years after I had retired. So you're probably asking yourself, oh my gosh, George, did you go through some tough financial difficulties? Not really. What happened is I had a family member that got very sick, and I was in Medellin investing in real estate. I came back to Tucson to help this family member through some very difficult times, let's say. And I was in Tucson, didn't have anything to do. I got very bored, and I was very interested in doing something online. So I thought to myself, you know what would be fun is I'm going to set up a YouTube channel, and I'm going to document my entire process of starting to work at McDonald's and then making $1 million. The project was called Minimum Wage to Millionaire. And it's something that I did for 6 months. So it started off with me getting a job, as you can see, at McDonald's. I started off with a job, a cell phone, $1,000 in my bank account, and a car, a Prius. And a funny story is that's why I always use a Prius for Moody the millennial when they are driving for Uber, because that's the exact car I had. So that was the starting point for the Minimum Wage to Millionaire project that I was doing when I was in Tucson helping out my younger brother. Another interesting fact is a lot of you have heard me talk about flipping trucks. You say, man, where on earth did that come from? This is exactly where it came from. So what I did is I cut my expenses down to the bare bone. I was living in a crappy apartment. I think I was paying maybe, I don't know, $300 or $400 a month for it in the ghetto of Tucson. But I wanted to show, and I wanted to make sure that I was paying all my living expenses from what I was making at McDonald's and driving Uber. What I did is I saved up a little money. I started to buy one truck, started to flip it. I bought two. I kept going. And after 6 months of working at McDonald's, driving for Uber, and then starting to figure out how to make money flipping things, I had over $20,000 in my bank account. Unfortunately, I had to quit after 6 months because we had to move my family member to another part of the country for health reasons. Obviously, that's priority number one above and beyond my crazy project. But I was able to prove that it can be done. You can start at the bottom and still improve your financial situation very quickly. And let me be clear, I'm not here to brag or say that anything I did was great. What I'm here to say is that you don't need politicians. You can do this on your own. You have the ability to do exactly what I did, if not do it better. I've never taken an econ class. I've never taken a business class. I've never taken a finance class. I almost flunked out of high school. So if I can start with just a minimum wage job at McDonald's, a cell phone, a car, and $1,000 in the bank, and if I can grow that to $20,000 over 6 months, you can do the exact same thing. And if you're someone right now that's a cynic, that's saying, oh, George, well, how do I get $1,000 in my account? How do I get a car? You just received over $5,000 in stimmy checks. So take the stimmy checks, buy a Prius, get yourself a job, work overtime, work for Uber. And if you do this, if you hustle, if you have ambition, you have the ability to provide for yourself and forget about the handouts from the government. This victim mentality that we have in the United States right now isn't helping us at all. It's preventing us from achieving 100% of our potential. For more content that'll help you build wealth and thrive in a world of out-of-control central banks and big governments, check out this playlist right here, and I will see you on the next video.